honourable member for Cypress Medicine Hat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to my honourable colleagues for this opportunity to rise and speak to Bill 12, the Royalty Guarantee Act. Mr. Speaker, the Royalty Guarantee Act is an important step towards strengthening investor confidence in our province's oil and gas sector. This act will provide long-term certainty to investors by affirming that the current royalty structure will be maintained for at least 10 years. Mr. Speaker, I'm also glad to say that this guarantee is a platform promise and demonstrates the United Conservative Party's commitment to stand up for Albertans and to create jobs. Mr. Speaker, there's a couple things I want to touch on. Our province has had a couple of royalty reviews in the last 11 or 12 years, one 2007, 2008, and another one in 2016. And Mr. Speaker, I want to touch on the great uncertainty that this caused to our oil and gas producers and our companies. And of course, we know that one of the things that businesses crave is certainty. In a competitive world, in a world where it's sometimes hard to control and manage and budget your costs, what a company doesn't need to know is surprises. And I want to talk about how I saw the royalty review in 2007, 2008, and what it did to Medicine Hat and what it did to our good oil and gas companies down there. Mr. Speaker, for starting, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on Medicine Hat. Of course, we're the gas city. We have developed a tremendous amount of oil, tremendous amount of natural gas for all Albertans, for all Canadians. We have been leaders, like so many other people in Alberta, so many other parts of Alberta, of ensuring that natural gas was a valuable commodity produced at a good price for Albertans to use. Just a little history, Mr. Speaker. Not a lot of people know that in 1907, Rudyard Kipling coined the phrase at Medicine Hat, an area, as all hell for a basement. Interesting at the time, Mr. Speaker, the citizens of Medicine Hat were actually thinking of changing the name to Gasburg. Thank goodness that they kept the Blackfoot tradition. The word hat and medicine kind of comes from the Blackfoot word Samus, and that continued. But Mr. Speaker, that shows the connection to the southeastern part of our province that the good people of southeastern Alberta and Medicine Hat have to the oil and gas industry, have to the removal of carbon, and have to promoting that. Mr. Speaker, that it only got better. Right next door to Medicine Hat is the Suffield Block. Hundreds and hundreds of square miles where the British Army 3 or 4 times a year brings in 2,500 approximately soldiers to train, where the Canadian government and Canadian scientists for years have conducted first-rate research. But Mr. Speaker, it's been an amazing partnership between the Canadian government, the British soldiers that train, and our good oil and gas business. It's one of the areas where Alberta Energy in the 70s first developed, where Albertans and Canadians got really, really good at extracting natural gas and oil and sharing the wealth. Mr. Speaker, some years our area paid billions of dollars in royalties to the Alberta Treasury. But Mr. Speaker, here's what happened. Here's what happened without the certainty that we're going to see Bill 12 provide and in the Royalty Guarantee Act. When the first royalty was conducted in 2008, the government at the time was told, our margins aren't told by our good producers that margins were tight, that other jurisdictions offered more certainty and more opportunity, and if they persisted, many would leave. Mr. Speaker, and what happened was 5 or 6 big ones, 5 or 6 good employers rather, did leave as the royalty review was happening, costing our city, costing our area tens and tens of jobs, costing the wealth and the income that would circulate. And Mr. Speaker, that's one of the reasons that I'm so pleased to see that the Royalty Guarantee Act, and I'll say it again, affirms that the current royalty structure will be maintained for at least 10 years. The certainty that these companies need to provide the jobs, invest the tens and tens of millions of capital to make it happen. Mr. Speaker, the Royalty Guarantee Act will help restore Alberta's competitive advantage. It's a guarantee, it's a major step towards ensuring investors that Alberta is a stable place to invest. I want to talk a little bit too about how important that is. From my business background and my experience, the number of times I've talked to our good, hardworking job creators and small business people, oil and gas and otherwise, that are lucky to eke out a 2, a 3, or a 4% return at the end of the year. As a matter of fact, I had coffee this morning with an executive who's in a fairly big business, who told me at the year end they feel lucky if they make 4% of their revenue. Madam Speaker, this is why they need certainty. A small change can wipe out investment dollars, worse yet, can kill jobs, and that is why this uncertainty is crucial. And that's why I'm such a supporter of the Royalty Guarantee Act here at second reading. Mr. Speaker, the uncertainty created by an open-end, wholesale review of our royalty structure, like was done in 2008, like the past government just did in 2016, that froze investment, caused uncertainty, lost jobs, will not be done under this government because of the Royalty Guarantee Act. Investors will no longer need to worry that the rules in Alberta will change at the halfway mark, halfway through a project. We're recommending a guarantee that no major changes to the oil and gas royalty structure for at least 10 years. And Mr. Speaker, we're also guaranteeing that once the well starts producing, it will be under the same royalty system for the same length of time. And Mr. Speaker, I reached out and I talked to some oil and gas investors that felt that 10 years was absolutely adequate, that felt that the 10 years was a strong guarantee, coupled with a free enterprise and a business-focused government, coupled with the good work of my colleague, the Honourable Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction, because that's a problem too. Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, this will restore hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in the Alberta oil and natural gas business to make sure that we can stay being a leader. Mr. Speaker, I want to also talk a little bit about what the last government also did to our good producers that can't be forgotten. At the same time, they put them through another royalty review in 2016, freezing investment, scaring the creation of jobs, a 20% provincial tax hike. A 20% provincial tax hike that made us not competitive. Mr. Speaker, a carbon tax that other competing jurisdictions didn't have, that led to carbon leakage, that made it harder on rural Alberta, made it harder on our not-for-profits and on our school divisions, but also made it much, much harder on our families with food costs, with gas costs, and made it much, much harder on our oil and gas producers because of the cost. And then the signals that the last government used to show. When the leader of the opposition, as Premier, refused to stand up to foreign interference in our oil and gas industry to landlock our resources, never mind even acknowledge it. Protests. Many of the past government's cabinet seen it protesting our great hydrocarbon industry. Never mind what their other half of their party, the federal party, said with the LEAP manifesto. Never mind a 100 megaton cap on emissions. There was a clear signal that they did not want this industry to grow, that they did not want this industry to thrive, that they did not want this industry to provide the jobs and the wealth and the billions and billions of dollars of transfer payments for all Canadians to benefit. All Canadians to benefit with jobs and social programs. You know, Mr. Speaker, the province, Alberta, great opportunity, great place to live, and it's about that Alberta advantage. And it's about that Alberta advantage of the most opportunity, the most competitive taxes, and the best social programs is exactly why we need Bill 12, the Royalty Guarantee Act, to provide the confidence for those that create jobs, those that create wealth, those that invest billions of dollars, certainly tens of million dollars to make it happen. Mr. Speaker, I want to come back to the royalty review in 1907, 1908, which was one of the reasons I decided to enter politics. And I don't know whether to call it, you know, the first of 1,000 cuts. Certainly, when I had the good fortune to knock on so many doors in the last campaign and see how resilient and how strong so many Albertans are, willing to travel to work, willing to do what it takes, willing to bear down. But it was a step back. And Mr. Speaker, when I heard last week that some of our natural gas companies, the spot price for natural gas right now is actually negative, meaning they have to pay to take away their oil and gas, or their gas in this case. Mr. Speaker, there's been so many issues that have made it hard for this industry. This certainty is required. This certainty will not only create jobs, it will protect what we have. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you a little bit more about Medicine Hat and some of the layers of burden that the past government put on them. At a time that things were a bit challenging, instead of doing something like a Royalty Guarantee Act, where we knew that things weren't going to change for 10 years, the last government decided to make it tougher. With that 20% tax increase I talked about, with the carbon tax, with extra layers of regulation, with the 100 megaton cap. And Mr. Speaker, here's some of the effects. Knocking on doors, it was absolutely alarming how many Cypress Medicine Hatters were on their way to North Dakota, Texas, Wyoming, Oklahoma, even Argentina, even Iran, because that's where work was. It was alarming. Mr. Speaker, the City of Medicine Hat, our gas department used to return considerable profits to the good people of Medicine Hat. And unfortunately now it's losing money, and a $24 million dividend that used to assist providing good public services is no longer available. Mr. Speaker, the mayor and the council people in Medicine Hat are having to find $24 million of annual savings because they don't get this dividend anymore. Mr. Speaker, that's comparable to Calgary Edmonton having to find $500 million in savings. Mr. Speaker, the problems and the reverberation of our oil and gas industry not being strong is wide felt. That is why we need Bill 12. That is why we need to have the guarantee of royalty protection so these people can invest it and create jobs. know, Mr. Speaker, I also want to talk about some other layers that have to be addressed. The federal government, under the Species at Risk Act, an environmental protection order to protect sage grouse in our area. And everybody wants to protect the sage grouse. Everybody wants to make sure that they thrive, industry thrives, and everyone has a chance to do well. But Mr. Speaker, here's what's happened. A company called LGX ended up going into receivership. Hundreds of families that used to work there affected. The city of Medicine Hat ended up suing the federal government for $42 million because of this being placed. And people that care about the sage grouse are noticing that with the introduction of fox, with hardly any families out there, there's more coyotes. They're noticing that the sage grouse, the leks where they mate and dance, seem to be in areas where people used to live. They're hoping that this is the kind of thing that, again, that rules and regulations and a government that cares about family and free enterprise in the oil and gas industry can have an opportunity to look at, to make sure that we work hand in hand better to protect our environment, to protect our species, and to make sure that all Alberta families have an opportunity to flourish, to do well, and create jobs. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to close with just simple. I very, very much support the Royalty Guarantee Act. I very much know that good, ethical, safe development of oil and gas is what Alberta has done best. I'm so pleased that southeastern Alberta and Medicine Hat has been a leader in that area since the 50s and 60s, and very, very much wants to continue to do that. Mr. Speaker, I know that this act will provide the long-term certainty that investors need to invest their money, take some risk, but at the same time, create some jobs and pay some royalties so Alberta can continue to have the best social programs in all of Canada. And Mr. Speaker, I'm especially glad that this guarantee is a platform promise and demonstrates our commitment to stand up for all Albertans and create jobs. Thank you.